so the Deuteronomistic historian is writing this from the perspective of knowing the northern kingdom gets annihilated and never comes back.
Right.
But the southern kingdom, although it also gets annihilated, there is hope.
Welcome to Cross Connections, Season 2, Cover to Cover, as we read along with you each week and discuss the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Cover to Cover is hosted by
Rick Morley,
Elliot VanHoy,
and Natalee Hill. Join us as we discover how these stories connect us to God, to our inner selves, and to one another in a world that tries so hard to disconnect us. Welcome back, folks. And welcome to the time of the Kings. We are in 1 Kings today. And in some ways, this is just a continuation of what we've been reading since the beginning of 1 Samuel.
It's the same story. It's the Deuteronomistic History. We're at the end of the Deuteronomistic History because the books of 1st and 2nd Kings are the end of that. But yeah, it's the same story.
Yeah, this will all lead up to
the
destruction of
both the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Yeah.
And the first temple that we haven't even talked about having been built yet.
Yeah, it doesn't last for that long.
No.
Right.
Lots of things don't seem to last for that long. Like the good times with the United Kingdoms of Judah.
Oh, weren't they
Israel.
the good old days
when good old days.
Everyone was under one king and
yeah.
everything was going great.
Until that thing with Uriah, or at least in this account.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reminder of where we are and how these got named the way that they named. I also saw something about a reminder that there's the former prophets in the Hebrew texts, and we have that in a different place in our Christian Bibles.
I mean, the brief explanation is that this is in what we call the historical books, right? So
in the Christian tradition.
In the Christian tradition.
Yep.
So in our Christian Bibles, that's where it's going to find. You're going to find it. And then in the Jewish Bible, it is in, like you said, the former prophets, right? Or it's sometimes called the latter prophets.
Yeah.
So we found that with
Samuel
as well. Yep. And then I'm trying to remember, maybe even Joshua, but I can't remember. I think that's
so.
true of Joshua as well.
Yeah.
So, and again, the same thing with 1st and 2nd Samuel. We have 1st and 2nd Kings arbitrarily just because it wouldn't all fit onto one scroll. So they split it into two, but it's basically one book.
Right. And I will say, it makes sense to put 1st and 2nd Samuel and Kings and whatnot in the latter former prophets in the Tanakh, because as we'll find here and we'll discuss, prophets play a major role in these books, right? So as we've talked about, prophets, we really see them come to prominence during the time of kings in Israel and Judah, which is also important because traditionally the book of 1st and 2nd Kings is understood to have been written by the prophet Jeremiah. That's just the tradition. He is one of the later prophets in this line of prophets, and so people thought he wrote it. As Rick talked about with the Deuteronomistic History, we believe there was this kind of school of theology and educated writers that wrote a lot of this history, compiled it together. We don't really understand that there was one author that wrote this book, most likely. It's a composite document, like all of the works we've been working through. So that's a little bit of background to the authorship as well.
There's actually an interesting scholarly theory that it was Jeremiah's scribe, whose name I cannot remember at the moment.
Yeah.
Go Google it. That he was actually had a major hand in the Deuteronomistic History and didn't write it all, but edited it.
Right.
And there's some really compelling evidence of that, but that's like really in the weeds.
That is really in the weeds. And
that's on next year's podcast. We'll do that next year's.
And again, I think we say this pretty much every time, but this is not history the way that we
know it.
study history in 2025. We're not trying to go back to facts. Yes, there's some interesting archaeological evidence that there may have been some of these characters, but in this particular way, exactly these events, none of that is anything that we can prove. And that's not the point of the reason for the writing of these.
Right. The whole Deuteronomistic History, think of it as a sermon. It's not history like a history book like we understand it. It's trying to make a theological point about events.
Yep.
And the Deuteronomistic History's point is, if you do good things will happen to you. If you do bad things, look out.
Because remember, all of this is written in the context of both exile and the fall of the northern kingdom, Israel, and the southern kingdom, Judah. And so that's the overarching context and asking the question, why did this happen? And, oh, look, here's the answer.
Right.
These judges, these kings, they did what was displeasing in the sight of
unfaithful.
the Lord. They were unfaithful.
Right.
And so they're in exile. Like, how do we get out of this? Like, how do we right the ship? The Deuteronomistic historians' theological point is we right the ship by being faithful.
Right.
Right.
Yep. So we turn here to a new king, somewhat. We got his birth in our previous book, but we're getting the death of his father David and the rise of Solomon.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's some intrigue right away because Adonijah wants to take the throne.
And this was the fourth son of David.
Mm-hmm.
Believes it's his right.
Yep.
Yeah.
You sons
claim.
1 through 3 are all dead at this point for
like,
a variety of reasons. Listen to last week's podcast to hear how that happened. And so, yeah, Adonijah thinks he's got it. And David's major general, Joab, he's on Adonijah's side.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But Solomon has on his side God, the prophet Nathan, and his mother, Bathsheba, all of who come into play, checking in with the practically on his deathbed King David.
Yeah. And importantly, there is a priestly split as well. And so if I'm remembering this right,
There's Zadok.
There's Zadok who sides with Solomon and Bathsheba. And then there's Abiathar. I think I'm getting this right. Abiathar, who sides with Adonijah. And that's important to remember. This is just a fun, like, full circle 1 Samuel, because Eli's sons upset God. God says, all right, you are going to pay for this. Your sons and tribe are going to be wiped out. And Abiathar is one of Eli's descendants. And so when Abiathar is finally killed, I'll have to try and find it, but there's a line in here that says, like, this was to fulfill what God had said to Eli. So really interesting to see.
That is fascinating.
I'll have to see. We'll come back to that at some point, and I'll see if I can find it in here. I think it's, I see it in my notes. It's 227. Anyone listening, open up that Bible or open up your app and go to 227. You'll see that, and 26 beforehand, the King Solomon said to the priest Abiathar, go to this place, to your estate, you deserve death. He does end up dying. But it says in 27, Solomon banished Abiathar from being priest to the Lord, thus fulfilling the word of the Lord that he had spoken concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh.
That is amazing.
Full circle.
Yeah. I also quickly Googled Zadok the priest because I kept reading this, and I kept going, who's Zadok the priest? Or what is Zadok the priest? Why is that sticking out in my brain so much? And so he's a descendant all the way back to Aaron, but also Handel wrote a whole piece of music.
I cannot read the beginning of 1 Kings without Handel in the back of my head.
That is the nerdiest thing I've ever heard.
If you have not heard Zadok the priest, it is epic. It is absolutely epic. There's this huge musical like beginning, and then the choir just booms in. Fun fact, it is always sung at the coronation of British monarchs and was sung at the coronation of King Charles.
What do you know?
What a cool fun fact.
There we go.
Why
I like
is this
that.
in my brain? Well, I will make
seriously,
sure that we
Google
link
it and
there's a Choir of Westminster Abbey recording, which is probably
they're the ones who sang it.
pristine.
Yep.
Maybe we can get Elaine to play a little bit for us. I can clip it in the end.
Yeah, clip it into the end of the podcast.
I wanted it at my institution, but she said no. I wanted it like a true coronation.
Wow.
No, I'm not. I'm just kidding. She didn't say
Because
no.
Elaine has nothing else to do as we are right in Holy Week right
That's
now.
right. No, right.
So yes, so this division, correct me if I'm wrong, and my notes didn't mention, but Adonijah, right?
Yeah.
Does not die for showing up and saying, hey, I want to be king. He gets kind of sent away like, no, that's not going to be you. It's going to be Solomon, and things just move into Solomon.
Yep.
But this sounds like one of a few times.
There's a theme of people being shown mercy when they're sort of in the line of being king or being king themselves, and like
Right.
where the reigning king, in this case Solomon, says, no, we're not gonna hurt them.
Yeah.
Well, but he does ultimately kill Adonijah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he'll get there.
We tell the listener why? Because I think it's quite funny. Yeah, he's like, oh, you want to be king? That's okay. You're all right.
Oh, that's
but then,
right. I forgot.
But then,
the person he wanted to.
Yeah, he wants to marry. At the start of First Kings, there is this virgin who is brought to David. I'm blanking on her name at the moment. Abishag. There we go. Yeah, it's one of those hard
Shunammite.
ones, strange ones. Yep.
I wrote it down.
And so eventually, she's said to be very beautiful. And at some point, Adonijah tells Bathsheba, like, listen, don't worry about me. I'm not going to try and usurp Solomon, but just give me Abishag. And Bathsheba brings us to Solomon, which seems like a very reasonable request.
Sure.
Yeah. Like, he's just like, I want a wife, and this woman's beautiful. David's dead. It'll work out for me. And Solomon's like, nope, it's not going to work out for you. Time to die.
Off with your head.
Yeah, off with your head.
So
it's considered this huge insult, and I was trying to figure out why. I mean, she was David's nurse.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
I thought maybe was there some sort of a political alliance that would have given him some sort of, no, doesn't seem
I
that's
truly
part
have
of it at all.
no idea why this upset Solomon so much.
Well, I wonder if it ties back to the whole situation with the concubines from last time when Absalom slept with David's concubines as a way to kind of like peeing on the tree sort of move.
Yeah, right.
Like, I just kind of wonder if it's somehow connected to that.
It could be.
Like you're encroaching too close.
Yeah. It's too close to the power level. Or whatnot.
I mean, I think this is just my own projection, right? As we will talk about later in this episode, what is Solomon's greatest shortcoming? He gives his heart to these foreign women. He just cannot help himself.
It's too many wives. What did we say? That was what in
in Deuteronomy.
Numbers or
I think,
Deuteronomy 7 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, on the one hand, I think you could also just read it as this guy had a serious problem with jealousy and beautiful women. And so this guy Adonijah asked the wrong question.
And we're going to see that more and more as we go along, because there's a long list of women that Solomon has.
A lot.
From lots of different countries.
But before we get there, Solomon is famous, as many people know, for allying himself with Pharaoh. He marries Pharaoh's daughter as one of his many marriages. That happens in chapter 3.
And after all the rules in the early Old Testament about do not intermarry, right? We are not going to intermarry with other nations.
Yep.
And then Solomon's like, nope.
First thing he does. Yep.
And she's kind of like the major wife initially. We'll get beyond that. So marries her, but also in chapter 3, the big thing that he's known for is
his prayer,
his great wisdom.
Yeah.
He prays to God, and the one thing he asks for is wisdom.
Right.
And God basically says, because you didn't ask for power, you didn't ask for your enemies to be toppled, I will give you the wisdom, and I will, right.
Yes.
And everything you didn't ask for.
This
it's like the wise prayer.
The classic loophole.
Yeah.
How to get all the things you really wanted.
Right.
Well, and then there's the infamous story of these two women. They're actually prostitutes, I believe it says, who come to him with a baby. And it's the classic, okay, we'll cut the baby in half. And the one whose baby it really is like, no, give it to the other woman. And the other woman's like, oh, yeah, cut it in half.
And everyone's so amazed at how wise Solomon was.
This is such a hard decision.
That is unbelievable. Where did he come up with that? It's incredible.
It's like so obvious.
I know.
Yeah.
It's painfully obvious.
Yeah, but painfully so.
Well, this is how we end up with the book, The Wisdom of Solomon.
Right. And famously, maybe worth saying that it is often attributed to Solomon, the book of Ecclesiastes, that this book of kind of the wisdom of life comes from this king.
Did the Proverbs come from him as well?
I can't remember if that's attributed to Solomon.
I thought so, actually.
Yeah.
Attributed.
That does make sense.
And then the Song of Solomon as well.
Yes.
There are some parallels here to David.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the early part of Solomon's story, he sort of is like, I mean, we're seeing some warts there, but he's presented like God is firmly behind him.
Yes.
Right? And giving him whatever he wants.
Yeah.
Yep.
God loves him. The kingdoms are united under him. He's over Judah and Israel. He's got lots of land, lots of peace, lots of provisions, and lots of wisdom, and more than several other named people.
Yeah.
In chapter 4, it goes into, more than this person and that person.
Right.
Yep. And this is a moment where we joked with David's reign. We finally had this moment of like stability. After the time of the judges and how quickly it went away, right? With Uriah and then the spiraling of David's family. And there's a return to that stability here for just, again, another quick respite. So, for example, in chapter 4, verse 20, it says, Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. Solomon was sovereign over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines, even to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life.
Yeah, and then
it's a high point.
It's a high point. It's
right?
like, this is great. And then now this finally gives the moment to build God's house, right? To build this temple, which was promised during David's reign, that one of David's sons would build this temple to the Lord. And so we get this, elaborate description of these alliances he makes and this famous cedar and timber that come from all over the world. And he constructs this temple with gold and yada, 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 yada. It's a bit yada. I just yada yada the temple.
I know. The entire temple.
Okay, moving on.
There's a lot of peace,
description.
Peace on all sides was a big deal. I mean, it wasn't just peace within the two nations, but peace all around as well.
Yeah.
Ruled the entire kingdom. It gave the boundaries of how large the kingdom was that he ruled. Peace on all sides. And therefore, because of some of that peace and some treaties, he could bring in the materials from all over to build this grand temple, which I know Rick is just
chomping at the bit here.
To talk about.
Yeah, because we spent some time with the tabernacle in the wilderness and its construction, and the temple in Jerusalem mirrors it identically. I mean, it's set up exactly the same, except it's not a tent. It's not temporary. It's not meant to be broken down and carried off somewhere else. It's now, as you said, it's cedar and stone and gold, and it's meant to be permanent.
Meant to be
by the next episode. It'll be gone, so it's not that permanent. But there's this outer court, and it's in the outer court that the altar's there, and there's this great basin that's there for washing, and then there's the actual building of the temple, and there's an outer sanctum, which there's like an altar of incense on, and then there's a inner holy of holies, which in the tabernacle in the wilderness was a cube. It is also a cube here, and just like in the tabernacle in the wilderness, the Ark of the Covenant sat in the Holy of Holies. Right. And the temple is described multiple times as the house. It's God's house on earth. It is the place where God dwells with God's people. In chapter 8, verse 27, there's this great question. Because will God truly live on the earth? Yeah. And the answer it gives is like, well, sort of. Like it's not, God doesn't just live here, right? This is sort of, this is like God's summer home. God dwells in the heavens, but he has a summer home right here with us. And at the very end of when they dedicate the temple, the presence of God comes in as this great cloud of smoke, and everyone has to like clear out. And it's this sign that, number one, God's actually there.
It's very like the cloud, the pillar of smoke and fire in the wilderness.
Right.
Yeah. But this is God's summer home, because as we said last time, it's humans who need a box, a temple, a place for God. God allows it, but God does not need this.
Yeah.
God's like, okay, go ahead.
God gives it to Israel,
right,
so that they could know that God dwells with them,
right?
Which is a major theme in the Old and New Testaments, that God always dwells with us, right?
But it's physically different in the ways that we understand it in the Old.
Yes, right.
Yes.
Other things will start to be called the temple in the New Testament, like Jesus and our body. Right. And some of that is because Jesus changes the theology a little bit, but also because by the year 70, there is no temple. Right. And so they sort of have to come up with another theology around it. Like we can't lean into the temple idea too much because there isn't one.
But right now we're leaning hard into the temple theology.
Right.
Definitely.
And part of built into how the Deuteronomistic historian understands temple theology is that there is to be only one. Yep. This is not like some grand cathedral that is like one church among many churches. It is the place where God is to be worshipped. Right. And there aren't supposed to be other little satellite places of worship, which is so outside of our understanding. And here on the St. David's campus, there are 2 buildings that you could call a church, right? And there's a
Right.
church right up the street, and
Right.
there's like 8 churches on Main Street, Wayne.
Yeah.
But-
Yeah.
Right.
And
So
we
we're-
worship in multiple rooms in this, even in the one building.
absolutely. But in their understanding, this
Mm-hmm.
is God's house.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And that's going to become a problem because people are going to start setting up other houses.
That really becomes the main theme of this split that happens after Solomon's death, where the kings in each kingdom are judged by whether they are faithful to God, specifically through the lens of, do they set up sites of other worship and to other gods?
Yep.
And this really
Yes.
becomes the big no-no in the book of 1 Kings, so much so that, as we'll talk about, we get a literal battle between God and the other gods, specifically Baal.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that. I did want to say 2 things about Solomon's temple. The first one is, I know a lot of people have asked us about like archaeological evidence for things we're talking about. There's 0 archaeological evidence for this first temple.
Yep.
So in case anyone is interested, it just doesn't exist.
There is archaeological evidence of other temples
Right.
in ancient Israel.
Yes.
And so you're able to go back and look at them, and you see them constructed very similarly to how
Yes.
this temple is said to have been constructed. But there is no archaeological evidence actually for Solomon's temple.
Yes. In fact, I was reading about this and it was saying it is very similar to specifically Phoenician and Canaanite temples. So that's, quite interesting to reflect on.
It is how almost every temple in the ancient Near East was constructed: an outer court with a building with an outer sanctum and an inner sanctum.
Right.
Anyone living in any of those countries, in any of those tribes, if they went to Jerusalem and saw Solomon's temple, they'd be like, oh yeah, it's a temple.
Right. The other
That looks familiar.
The other interesting thing, even just in the text itself, that I thought was unique, and there's not really a negative connotation behind it, I don't think, but it talks about at the end of 6 and the beginning of chapter 7. So we're neglecting to mention Solomon also built a ginormous palace, not just a temple.
Yeah.
And so it says at the end of 6, he's building this temple, and he spent 7 years in building it.
Yeah.
And then
It's a long time.
It's a long time.
That's
7 years to build a
That's
temple.
big building project.
Yeah. But how long did it take him to build his palace?
Almost double,
Elliot?
13 years.
Oh,
13 years.
oh.
And it's much larger.
And it is much larger.
If the little
Wow.
picture in my
Study Bible.
study Bible is
Yeah.
anything
Huh.
to...
So you're saying Solomon put more time and energy into his house
Apparently.
than God's house?
Apparently.
Huh. There are these like little like warts you just
Yup.
see
Yep.
like starting
Yup.
to like,
And it doesn't even
appear.
say, like when it
No.
says this, it's not like, oh,
No.
he was bad for doing this.
No.
Like
But it's
No,
just like,
just,
huh,
it just is
Yeah.
a fact.
you
that-
scratch your head a little bit and you're like,
Really?
maybe I should read on a little
Yeah,
further
right.
and see if anything else
Yeah.
weird pops up like that.
Yeah, it's like,
So.
this guy might have liked some things a little too much.
Yeah.
And we're about to see that in, chapter 11?
Yeah. Well, so 8 is when the temple's dedicated. Solomon has a lot to say to all of the people. All the people are gathered for
Mhm.
that.
And then
and there's like a blessings and curses kinds of a thing that goes on in there.
well, yeah, because we're getting chapter 8 as we come into it is a big Deuteronomistic historian chapter. I mean, you see the theology come out a lot, which is where you see it's the blessing and the curses. In chapter 8, verse 33, when your people Israel take a beating before an enemy because they do wrong in relation to you, but they turn back to you and confess your name and plead and pray for grace towards you in this house, may you yourself listen in the heavens and pardon your people Israel's wrongdoing.
Mhm.
Take them back to the land that you gave to their ancestors. Like when they do wrong, they're going to be punished, but may you remember your promise and bring them back. We see that a little bit further in the chapter 2 under the blessings section. May Yahweh our God be with us as he was with our ancestors, and may he not abandon us, may he not leave us, by inclining our mind to him so that we may walk in all his ways and keep his orders, his decrees, and his rulings that he ordered our ancestors. Because if we don't,
Mm-hmm.
we're in big trouble.
Right.
And so we're hearing a little Deuteronomistic historian theology. We're also getting set up for when they don't follow God's
Mhm.
decrees and God's rules and
Yep.
the wheels come off the wagon.
A few other little interesting stories in here. After the temple's built, Solomon gives some land to King Hiram of Tyre because as like a thank you for his support.
He's not really psyched about what he gets.
No. He calls the towns Kabul, which in here apparently means a land good for nothing.
Yep.
He's like, okay, well, that's nice. A section of land, Gezer, is given to Solomon and his daughter, who, again, is the daughter of the Pharaoh, by Pharaoh as a wedding gift. That's a little interesting piece of note.
There's a note in, well, not a note, but a verse 21. Solomon raised a slave workforce.
Yep. Yeah.
Which,
Yes.
Chapter 9, 21.
Yeah.
There's a whole description of the account of the forced labor.
Yeah. I mean, and remember where this story all began. It began with Israel as a group of slaves. And so.
Probably building Egyptian temples.
Right. And so now we're the empire builders.
Right.
Right. We're the ones that are using slaves.
It didn't take us long to get to being the empire.
Yeah.
No, right. Yeah. And there's all those warnings in the early books of the Bible, like, remember you were slaves in a foreign land. Remember you were foreigners. Remember you were, we didn't remember.
No, no, we didn't.
So then in 10, I made notes that made me think like, I'm wondering if this was where I started to notice something's not feeling good. He has a visit from the Queen of Sheba. All that's great. She's very impressed by him and his wisdom. They become great friends.
Bring lots of gifts.
And then she gives him lots and lots of gifts. And I started to go, Solomon's stuff is getting awfully ornate.
Yep.
And it's starting to feel a little bit like we said last week that power might begin to corrupt.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then in chapter 11, we have this dramatic shift.
I was waiting for it.
Up until this point, Solomon's been doing pretty good. We've noticed some warts. So there's some issues, but like God's been with him. He's behind him and he's got the wisdom and everything. And then at the beginning of chapter 11 now, King Solomon loved many foreign women, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonites, and Hittites from the nations of which Yahweh had said to the Israelites, you will not have relations with them and they will not have relations with you. And so not only does it say like he's got a lot of women from a lot of different places, but it directly quotes the rules from the earlier books, like that he was not supposed to do this.
Yeah.
And so it's this first note that Solomon is not doing what God wanted him to do.
Solomon's problem, as they say in Hamilton, is the ladies and all of his wives from, different area codes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you know, you know. And the wheels start coming off the wagon pretty quick because in chapter 11, we at the very beginning of that is when we're given that he did things that were wrong. By verse 14, we start having foreign adversaries come in and defeat the army.
Yeah.
And so, it's
and
classic,
the Lord is the one who raises these up.
Yes.
Right?
Classic Deuteronomistic historian theology. Evil nations have other nations come and take them over.
Yep.
By God's hand.
And then we really get the split, which happens in 12, but you see it here in 11 with this figure in 11:26, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, an Ephraimite, initially a servant of Solomon, it says. And he begins to raise up, and he has this prophet, Ahijah, who comes and says, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go take all of the northern tribes above Judah, and you are going to form a kingdom, and Judah will get to be its own thing. And it's really interesting. Verse 32 of that chapter 11. One tribe will remain his, that is Solomon's, Judah, for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen out of all of the tribes of Israel. So this is important too, because most scholars will say 1 Kings is written from a Judahite perspective.
Yep.
And so we see these moments where it's like, okay, for the sake of David, for the sake of Judah, this chosen tribe, God is going to preserve. And when we get this split that begins with Jeroboam in northern kingdom of Israel, and then we get Solomon's son Rehoboam and
over the southern kingdom
of Judah, which is very confusing. Their names are so similar.
Yeah.
But what we will see, and we'll get into this, is that the northern kings are viewed much more negatively than the southern kings, and the northern kingdom is viewed much more negatively than the southern kingdom.
Yeah.
Right. And sorry, I was going to say, and we also find that the northern kings, there's not a solid lineage.
Linear succession, yeah.
Succession in those northern kingdoms. The southern kingdom Judah does manage to retain the line of succession through David, which of course is important all the way through and into the New Testament. To maintain that. But the greater problems with the Northern Kingdom and the slightly lesser problems, but still problems with the Southern Kingdom, is all from that perspective to explain why the Northern Kingdom falls.
Yes.
First, especially.
Because the Northern Kingdom falls in 722. Yeah. So, that happens a few hundred years before, not a few, but about 150 before the Southern Kingdom. So there's this long period where they're like, oh my gosh, this entire Northern Kingdom
they're wiped away.
Yeah.
And they never reconstitute.
Right.
They never come back.
Right.
They are pulled away into different areas. They are subsumed into their cultures. They are lost.
Right.
They are gone and they never come back.
And this happens at the hand of the Assyrians.
Yeah.
Yeah, and throughout here, I think we see the rise of these other larger surrounding kingdoms and peoples like the Assyrians, which again, in this perspective, the way that it's written is always done by the hand of God as kind of punishment for the way in which, or response, he warned them to how they've been unfaithful.
And so the Deuteronomistic historian is writing this from the perspective of knowing the Northern Kingdom gets annihilated and never comes back.
Right.
But the Southern Kingdom, although it also gets annihilated, there is hope.
Right.
And it does eventually reconstitute. And so, theologically, well, why? Why did the Northern Kingdom get wiped off the map, but the Southern Kingdom gets to come back? Well, it's because the Northern Kingdom was more evil.
Right.
And the Southern Kingdom had David.
Right.
And for the sake of David, we're gonna keep it going.
And to give some dates in perspective, so Northern Kingdom falls in 722, but Jerusalem does not fall. This is not part of the Northern Kingdom, right?
It's in Judah.
And so this happens in the Southern Kingdom in 586 BC. That temple is destroyed. And I believe, and if I'm not mixing up my dates, they come back around 522. Does that sound right?
70 years later.
Yeah, about 70 years later. So that's just to put into context what you were saying, Rick, of yes, and this happens at the hand of the Babylonians, not the Assyrians, who have risen to prominence at this point. So just some context for people about there's these two kingdoms. These are really important dates in biblical scholarship of like the 700s, the 500s, when these things happen, when the temple is destroyed. And then they begin a project, which we'll get to, this is jumping way ahead, of rebuilding the temple.
Spoilers, right?
I know, lots of spoilers. But that does not happen until significantly later.
Yep.
So just some spoilers ahead
So
for people.
So it's important as people like think about this in their heads. So you have this Northern Kingdom, you have the Southern Kingdom. The Southern Kingdom, as you said, has Jerusalem in it. And because it has Jerusalem in it, it also has the temple in it. And we just said how it's really important that there's only one place to worship, right? And that's the temple in the Southern Kingdom. So what do the Northern Kingdoms do? Are they like, oh, I guess we have to schlep down to Jerusalem to worship, right?
No.
Not quite.
Oh, no. They decide, no, we got to build our own places. And
they do it at Bethel and Dan.
right. So they build two.
They build two. And, well, here's part of the problem. Are these places to worship the Lord, Yahweh?
Maybe, sort of.
You remember what happens
Kind
at
of.
the end of chapter 12, what Jeroboam does?
He sets up two
Calves.
Two calves.
Golden calves.
Yeah.
and says,
Gosh, that
here
sounds
are
familiar.
here are your gods.
Golden calves? Here are your gods?
Yeah,
I feel like I
sounds
read
familiar.
that.
I
in
know.
Exodus?
Exodus.
Right.
Yeah.
Didn't Aaron say that?
Yep. So this is really a pivotal moment in this history where this is the explanation for what went so wrong. The explanation is they turned away from the Lord and they worshipped these idols. And not just idols, but they began worship. It becomes really polytheistic, and they began worshiping Baal, this Canaanite god or Philistine god, forgetting which one he is a god of. And
I thought it was Moabite.
one of these gods.
Anyway.
One of these gods. There's the other one with the A, like Asheroth.
Asherah, the Asherah poles.
Yeah, they began worshiping.
They do a lot. It's kind of a little bit of everything.
Yeah,
They end up in.
yeah.
So there is like some it's gray area as to whether these temples in Bethel and Dan are temples to foreign gods
Right.
or temples to Yahweh.
Right.
So we've talked multiple times about like Yahweh sort of following along in the storm god tradition of the ancient world, and one of the standard symbols of the big god on the block was always the bull.
Right.
And so the Northern Kingdom's like, Yahweh's our big storm god, and so we're going to put some bulls up, right? And that makes sense in their understanding of worshiping Yahweh. Now, it also opens the door to idolatry and the acknowledgement of other gods.
Right.
And that's a major problem.
Right.
Yeah, our lovely Maria Leal here gave me a book recently, How to Read the Bible Book by Book. And in here there's a note carefully that the two golden cows, bulls, are a form of syncretism.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yahweh in the form of an Egyptian deity, not Baalism, which is worship like a completely different god. So the idea being that, yes, as you said, it's a way of kind of, yeah, we're going to worship God, but in this, but then that's a little too close to
Everything else that's
and
around.
now everything else.
Yeah. The next major section of First Kings, we are introduced to one of the major figures, one of the major prophetic figures, why this is included in the Hebrew prophetic, early prophetic books, the figure of Elijah, who is a prophet to the north. He's up there with those renegades who are, sort of falling off the track, and he restores some sanity to the story.
Yeah, he's a big figure. I don't know. What chapter are you thinking of in particular, Rick? Because I'm thinking of chapter 17, but I don't want to jump ahead.
Exactly.
I think this is where he gets introduced, right? I don't think he comes up earlier. So chapter 17 starts with, now Elijah, the Tishbite of Tishbe. Who knows if that's right? But he comes into the picture. And there's this amazing story people might not have encountered before, where there's this moment of really resurrection in the Hebrew Bible, where he encounters this woman. It's a widow, and she has a son, and the son dies, and Elijah prays to God. In verse 20, he cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I am staying by killing her son?" Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again." The Lord listened to the voice of Elijah. The life of the child came into him again, and he revived.
Yeah.
What a story.
I know. I mean,
what a weird way to revive somebody.
What a weird way to revive someone.
Yeah.
It's not stretch over him 3 times.
Lay on top of them, full body.
Remember the story, because we're going to see something very similar in next week. Very similar. It's also kind of strange, but it's interesting. It reminds me of the raising of Lazarus, of course, or the couple of raisings that happen in the Gospels. But usually, like, this raising of Lazarus happens at the end of Jesus's story.
Right.
It's the it's in the Gospel of John. It's the last of the 7 signs of Jesus, and here it's like our introduction to Elijah. Who's Elijah? He's this guy who can raise the dead.
Right.
Yep.
And so a few things are happening at this time to contextualize this, even in Kings, because Kings is really a long book. Like, if you really tracked it chronologically, there's a lot of time that passes and a lot of kings.
Yep.
And so at this point, there seems to be some drought in the land, some famine in the land. You're not really sure where it came from, but likely it's a judgment from the Lord on the northern kingdom of Israel. And so at this point, to run really quickly through some of the names for any of the nerds that are interested, we started the kingdom of Israel with Jeroboam. We get his son Nadab. Then we get Baasha, who is not Nadab's son. He kills Nadab and all of Jeroboam's line. Then we get his son Elah. Then we get Zimri, who I believe is like a commander in the army.
Yep.
He kills Elah. Then we get this split with 2 guys, Omri and Tibri. And then I believe it's Omri's son, who is Ahab.
Captain Ahab.
Captain Ahab.
Sorry.
But this is important.
Not the guy searching for a white whale.
This is not that
different
guy.
Ahab.
Different
Yes,
Ahab.
different Ahab.
Different book.
But maybe named after this.
Yeah,
it's got to be
probably.
named
I'm
after this.
sure that
Ahab,
they
right? Can't be
pulled the
too
name
many
out of
other
here.
Ahabs
Yeah,
out there.
right, exactly.
But though I don't know the history of why that name was chosen. But all of this is to say, this period with Elijah happens during the reign of Ahab in the northern kingdom of Israel. And Elijah and Ahab really are enemies. And so at points throughout this section after 17, Elijah is fleeing from Ahab. Ahab wants to kill Elijah. There's all of these encounters with Ahab's wife, Jezebel.
Oh.
She's a major figure.
Yeah.
Jezebel is as important, if not more so, to the story than Ahab.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And an extremely powerful figure in her own right, though not on the side of Yahweh, because she comes from a different culture and she has other gods.
And just interesting for anyone that's like, if you've heard the idea of like a Jezebel, this is where it comes from. Here it is.
This is a negative connotations.
And they're presented, Ahab and Jezebel, like these Disney villains.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is nothing presented that is redeeming about them. They are conniving. They are power hungry. They are against Elijah at every turn. And I mean, the story of Ahab and Jezebel is when they encounter Naboth, where this fellow, he's got some land, it abuts Ahab's land, and so they're neighbors. And Ahab would like his land. He'd like to plant a garden there.
Right.
And Naboth's like, I really don't want to sell you my land. It's been my family's land for a long time. And Ahab the king goes, oh, okay. And he goes away sad. And then Jezebel finds him and she says, why do you look so sad? And he's like, well, I wanted this land, but Naboth wouldn't give it to me. And she's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, right.
You're the king.
Just kill him.
Yeah, and so she then ends up accusing him of a crime and getting two false witnesses, if you remember your 10 Commandments, to say, yes, he committed this crime. They stone him for the crime that he did not commit.
Right.
And then Ahab takes the land.
Right. Yep.
You know who she's reminding me of a little bit right now to bring in other things that you've probably read? Lady Macbeth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just the way, the kind of the machinations, the power behind the power.
Yep.
Shakespeare was a student of the Bible.
Yes.
I'm sure Jezebel was in the back of his mind.
Oh, yeah.
Thinking about.
I had an English teacher that very confidently claimed you cannot read and understand Shakespeare without having read pretty much the entirety of the Bible. So for anyone that wants to really start reading their Shakespeare, maybe you can do it after Cross Connections, and you'll be a Shakespeare expert, understand all the references.
Calling all theater majors.
I think the other really interesting thing about Jezebel and part of her infamy is that in chapter 18, it talks about how Jezebel specifically was killing prophets. And so you'll read in chapter 18, verse 4, when Jezebel was killing off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets, hid them 50 to a cave, and provided them with bread and water. And there's a few interesting things about this verse. One, Jezebel and Ahab, this northern power couple, they're killing prophets. But the other interesting thing about this verse is the way it talks about 100 prophets. And so what's interesting with this is it really, I think, for the first time demonstrates the rise in both Israel and Judah of this social class of people understood as prophets. Like we kind of think of it as like, oh, Elijah was a prophet. There was this one guy, he's the main guy, God came to him. But actually what we find in 1 Kings really for the first time is not only is there a contest between kings in both kingdoms and between the kingdoms, but a contest between prophets. And so jumping ahead a little bit, we'll have this encounter where I'm forgetting which king is asking for wisdom from the prophets, this school of people, and all of them are giving him like the affirmative, go into this battle. It might be Jehoshaphat. Go into this battle, you'll do great. Go do it. And Elijah comes and is like, no, they have a lying spirit. They don't have the real spirit of the Lord. It might not be Elijah. It's actually a different prophet. I'm mixing up my names here. It's Micaiah or something like this. What is the name? Sorry, I'm all over the place with my scriptures and nobody seems to.
Is this in chapter 22 somewhere?
It's definitely later in the book, towards the end of the book. But my point with all of this, yes, it's Micaiah. You see this in chapter 22. And yes, this is happening for anyone that is interested with Jehoshaphat. And so actually there's this moment where Jehoshaphat teams up with the northern kingdom. Remember, Jehoshaphat is a southern Judahite king, and he's the son of Asa. And they team up and they're going to go take over this city. And Micaiah basically gets put in prison because he's like, don't go do this. This isn't what you're supposed to do. And if you do this, you're going to die. It's just interesting to see this school of people that is present in the kingdom of both Israel and Judah, and the way that they are even competing with one another. So prophets, something to think about. I think the last thing I'll say about that with prophets, and we see this with Elijah and Ahab, is what does a prophet do? We talked a little bit last week with Samuel about how a prophet is not, a lot of people have this idea that a prophet tells the future.
Right?
Nope.
Not quite. That may happen, but really the fundamental role of a prophet is to bring the word of the Lord to those in authority and often function socially as someone that challenges authority. And I think there's a really, really wonderful verse, probably one of the best verses for understanding what a prophet does in chapter 18, verse 18. And so Elijah is interacting with Ahab. Like I said, remember, they're kind of enemies. And it says, this is verse 17, if you want to start there. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, I love this, "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?"
Oh, yeah.
Elijah answered him, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals." And really, this is what a prophet does. Like a prophet says, you have not followed the Lord, you have trampled justice, you have done what is displeasing, and you are the reason we are experiencing these calamities.
And speaking to a king.
And speaking to a king.
Speaking directly to a king.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
This is not for the faint of heart.
The phrasing you'll hear today is speak truth to power.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That is what a prophet does.
Yep.
Speak truth to power.
Which is why it was dangerous work.
Yeah, very dangerous. So much so that Elijah
And
has to
remains
go.
So.
Right.
It does. And so much so that Elijah has to go hide in a cave, which I think that actually might be.
Oh yeah, and looks for God, and God was
So-
not in
Yeah.
Before we get there, one of my favorite stories of Elijah is in chapter 19, right before he goes and he has this incredible encounter with God in verse like the beginning of chapter 19, he's despondent. He came and sat under a broom bush. He asked for his life that he might die. It's too much. Take my life now, Yahweh, because I'm no better than my ancestors. He's just beside himself. And so what does God tell him to do? He tells him to lay down and take a nap.
Yeah.
And get up and eat, and a loaf of bread appears.
Right.
I love this.
Man, you need to rest and eat, brother.
He has a snack and a nap.
Yes, please, a snack and a nap. You
And-
really need that.
And then he's a new man.
Yeah.
And then he continues on.
He needed a Snickers.
Yeah.
Please, this was after he girded his loins. By the way, I noticed that in 1846. So all those of you who love the girding of loins,
We'll always
you'll
think
find
of
it there.
that now, and I always think of Rick.
But yeah, a snack and a nap goes a long way.
It really
folks.
does. I can personally attest.
We need our rest.
But-
so
but-
saith God.
But then after the snack and a nap, he goes into the cave and he has this, what we call a theophany, where God shows up. He goes out. Yahweh was passing, and a great strong wind splitting mountains and breaking up cliffs before Yahweh. Yahweh was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake. Yahweh was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. Yahweh was not in the fire. And after the fire, my translation says a low murmuring sound, or in some places a sound of sheer silence. It's like God isn't in the pyrotechnics. God is in the still moment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Definitely one of the most powerful stories and verses from this book. I think a lot of people are familiar with that one. I think the famous translation is a still small voice.
Yeah.
That God is found in a still small voice.
So one of the other things that I thought was really beautiful that happens in here, and I remember studying this, I feel like it was either last Lent or maybe it was an Advent gathering with my church. We were talking about this passage, this set of passages. At this point, Elijah's feeling really alone,
Yeah.
right? All these other
'Cause
prophets
it's hard
have been
work.
killed.
Yeah.
He's killed prophets. This is hard work. He's being sought out by the king and the queen to be killed. And what does God do? God gives him community, gives him Elisha.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And that's how God says, get a snack and a nap.
And you don't need to be alone.
Let me talk to you. And you're not alone.
Right. And Elisha will be Elijah's successor.
Yep.
Which is very confusing. Again, speaking of similar names.
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
man.
Elijah and Elisha, exactly.
Right. Come on. Couldn't just give this guy another name.
Apparently not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of the other kings that we hear about, we just get little brief bits about each of them, and then it keeps telling you to refer to another book somewhere if you want to know more about what they did.
Some enigmatic book of the kings.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Isn't
these
the rest
annals.
what he did in the annals of the kings? It's like, okay, well, whatever.
And there seems to be two. It'll say after each king the annals of like the southern kings of Judah and then the northern kings of Israel. And so this seems to be explicitly talking about compositional history compiled from these other works.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, go check out that book, which doesn't exist anymore for us.
No,
Yeah.
we don't have it. But
I have some other fun facts that we can hit on really quick as we wrap
Okay.
up.
Well, I was just going to say, by the time we get to the end of this, so we end with King Ahab's death. But, you know, obviously there's going to be some more kings because we still got second kings to come.
Yep.
But I believe Jezebel has not yet died by the end of this.
I don't think so.
I think she comes back briefly.
It's also worth mentioning that much like Samuel, this was originally one book.
Right.
And when
Right.
the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, it was split up into two because of this issue of fitting it onto one scroll.
Yep.
So I don't think we mentioned that at the start of our episode.
I think I did.
Did you?
I did.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Worth saying it again.
Man, it's been a long episode.
3 hours ago. It's hard to say what.
But so, more to come about more of these kings. But, Elijah's still around. He's got Elisha.
Some random fun facts that we might have missed for the listener. The Queen of Sheba comes and visits Solomon. This is a famous moment in 1 Kings 10 and is interesting because the history of our world in Ethiopia, they often believe there's a connection here. Yep. And they think the Ethiopian emperors might have come from a union between Sheba and Solomon. We also didn't mention in 1 Kings 9, it talks about Solomon having a fleet of ships, which is just cool. It talks about these giant ships, Tarshish, which we think just means giant ships. And then that there could have been trade routes that would have taken place with these ships. So that's interesting to consider. I feel like another one was that I was going to mention. Oh, people have asked a lot about like archaeological history. And we mentioned last week these stele that talk about
Steely Dan.
Yeah, Steely Dan that talk about the, oddly enough,
the Tel Dan
stele.
Yes, I know.
So I love it. But they mention the house of David. So there's not an explicit reference to this individual named David, but in this context, the two kings that are referenced are King Ahab of Israel and then Omri, also of the northern kingdom of Israel. And so that's just interesting for people to know. Not on the Tel Dan stele, but Ahab comes on, if anyone wants to look it up, this is an Assyrian stele. It's the Kirk monolith. That's Kurkh. And then the Mesha stele, which is a Moabite one, that's Mesha, mentions Omri. So just interesting of like, this is actually extra biblical archaeological evidence of these two kings who existed. Don't know much about them, but they seem to have actually existed.
Well, if only we could find the annals of the kings.
I know, man, that'd make you famous. Listeners, go get digging. Those are all my fun facts.
Fabulous. Well, that gets us to the end of the first half of the scroll. We made it to the end of this scroll, but we got to get into the next scroll next week.
We finished the Deuteronomistic History. Yeah. Another major section of the Bible. Yeah.
The Chronicles was a retelling of the same story.
It's the same stuff, but it's not the Deuteronomistic History. It's a totally different telling by a different set of authors.
We'll get to that in a couple of weeks.
The chronicler.
Yeah. All right.
Till
then, gird your loins. And remember that when you feel alone, God will send you community.
And a snack.
And a nap.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Cross Connections Cover to Cover. New episodes drop each Wednesday. Please be sure to follow or like us on your favorite podcasting app to find us easily each week, or join us on our email list at stdavidschurch.org/crossconnections. If you have questions for us, you can call us at 484-588-5656 and leave a voicemail with your name, where you're from, and your question or comment. Please note, we may use your recorded voice in an upcoming episode of Cross Connections. If you like what you hear, we'd love if you would share this with your friends and rate us in Spotify and Apple Podcasts or whatever other app you're using so people can find us as well. Don't forget to visit our show notes for the year's reading list and any other resource links we've mentioned. Cross Connections is a ministry of St. David's Episcopal Church in Wayne, Pennsylvania. Season 2 Cover to Cover is hosted by
Rick Morley,
Elliot VanHoy,
and Natalee Hill. Logo graphic design and podcast production by Natalee Hill. Stock media music provided by Marscott and MoodMode Pond 5. You're welcome to learn more about all of St. David's worship and ministries at stdavidschurch.org. Hippy-dippy-doo-dah, yippee-skippy-day.
Male prostitutes were in the land.
We're live, so.
And yeah, that'll end up right at the bottom at the end of the thing. At the very end, after all the notes. Male prostitutes were in the land.
I'm just saying what the Bible says.
It does say that.
Just quoting the Bible here.